a lot of fun. It was like an hour and a half. So
The Planning and Zoning Board meeting for today, January 28th, has been called to order. We begin, as always, with our agenda. If anyone has any changes to the agenda, I'd like to hear them. Otherwise, could we have a motion, please, to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Second. All those in favor of adopting the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. That motion carries unanimously. We then move to looking at our minutes. We have minutes from the December 17th Planning and Zoning Board meeting. If there are any changes, I'd like to hear those as well. Otherwise, a motion to approve those minutes would be in order.
Make a motion to approve.
Second, please.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. The minutes have been approved. We now move on to our cases. Our first case begins 18 REZ 23. Mr. Paul is with us this evening. Hello.
Hello, Chair, and good evening, Board. So tonight, we have a request to rezone 2.03 acres at 6800 Holly Springs Road. The site is 3/4 of a mile south of Tryon Road and is located on the west side of Holly Springs Road, adjacent to the Camden Forest neighborhood. The property is also approximately 1,000 feet south of the southeast Cary Parkway. Here, you can see the site along Holly Springs Road. It contains one existing house, which is set back about 125 feet from the existing road pavement. The site is currently zoned R40, and the applicant is proposing to rezone the site to R20CU. Due to the size of the property and the maximum of 2 lots that would be created, the North Carolina general statutes would allow this property to be subdivided without being subject to the town's subdivision regulations, meaning that requirements for road improvements, streetscapes, and buffers would not apply. The newly created properties would, however, be required to meet all dimensional requirements of the zoning district, meaning the minimum lot sizes and setbacks. The applicant has offered zoning conditions to address some of the subdivision requirements. First, they are limiting the site to 2 dwellings. So if we show this hypothetical line here, for example, the applicant would create a second lot. The actual line placement, of course, could vary. The applicant has offered to dedicate right-of-way consistent with the Cary Community Plan. They have proposed to increase the rear yard setback from 20 feet to 50 feet, and also to propose a 10-foot landscape area. These last 2 conditions were offered after the neighborhood meeting to address some of the concerns shared by neighbors at that meeting. Staff performed a preliminary analysis of the proposal and how it conforms to the Cary Community Plan. The Live, Shape, and Move chapters are relevant to this case. Relevant policies from these chapters include those concerning infill development, future growth framework, and policies concerning site access. The lot is considered an infill lot with the Camden Forest neighborhood to the west and south, and these properties are zoned R12, and the adjacent lots range in size from 15,000 to 19,000 square feet. And to the north, the site is being developed with 2 detached dwellings through a rezoning that was approved in 2017. Continuing the infill trend we are seeing along this portion of Holly Springs Road, a rezoning application was recently submitted to the north at Southeast Cary Parkway for townhouses. The property is within the traditional neighborhood designation of the future growth framework, where large master plan communities and detached dwellings generally predominate. And when we zoom out a little bit, we can see the site's proximity to the destination center. According to Cary's GIS, there do not appear to be any stream buffers within close proximity of the site, and there are no parks or greenways immediately adjacent to the property. Now, Holly Springs Road is planned to be a 6-lane median divided thoroughfare, and as noted before, the applicant has offered a zoning condition to dedicate right-of-way along Holly Springs Road consistent with the road designation of a 6-lane thoroughfare in the Cary Community Plan. Staff also notes that because of the major thoroughfare designation, safety would be improved if the applicant were to provide one shared access point to limit the number of individual curb cuts on the road. However, the applicant has not offered a zoning condition regarding driveway access. The neighborhood meeting for this item was held on October 3rd, 2018, with 9 nearby property owners in attendance. The discussion included questions about widening of Holly Springs Road and concern over tree loss. For the public hearing for this item, which was held on December 13th of last year, no citizens spoke during the public hearing. Council asked staff about a shared access driveway option. Staff confirmed the applicant has not offered such a condition, and one council member noted possible issues with the shared access driveway for future owners of the site. and there have been no changes in this item since the public hearing. After review from staff, staff finds the rezoning to be consistent with the Imagine Cary Community Plan because the proposal supports policies from the Live, Shape, and Move chapters. The proposed residential use is consistent with the future growth framework for a traditional neighborhood, and the proposed use is reasonable given the infill nature of the site. This concludes staff's presentation. Staff is available to answer any questions.
Do we have an applicant to hear from this evening?
Is the applicant present? Okay, come on down.
Not the applicant, but the applicant's partner, not in the development, but I'm looking to purchase the house that's currently there.
Can we start with your name?
My name's Jason Hancock.
Thank you.
Would you like me to go over that again? You got it.
No, we got it.
All right, perfect. Have any questions?
We might. There's a seat there if you'd like while we kick this around a little bit. Does anyone have any questions for the staff or for the applicant?
I don't think I do.
Well,
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
well, and about the curb cuts, I need to understand, does DOT control those curb cuts in the future, or how does that happen?
Yes, that would be a DOT approval for those.
So they have to apply to DOT, get an approval, but
Yes, that's
the
correct.
town has no way of predicting what DOT would approve, is that
The
correct?
town does not have jurisdiction on that.
Yeah. That isn't exactly what I asked. Do we have any way of predicting what they might approve?
Based on past examples, one could possibly predict that, but again, ultimately, this is DOT's call. According to staff, it is a high likelihood that DOT would approve a driveway permit for both lots, so there'd be two driveway cuts.
That's what I thought.
We just don't want to speak on behalf of DOT.
I know.
Okay. Steve, you were going to say something?
No, I was saying I
Oh, okay.
have no questions.
How about this side? Aren't you?
I had the same question as Chuck, and I guess I still have that question, but doesn't seem to be a resolution. So.
Nothing? Wow. You're off the hook. Okay, so would there be a motion then?
I'll make a motion. I move that the board find case number 18 REZ 23 is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans for the reasons set forth in the staff report, presentation, and discussion by the Planning and Zoning Board.
Have we a second for that?
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
To me, this is, we've actually approved this similar, not that long ago. There's some of these really big lots that are over there on Holly Springs Road. This seems like a really good use of the property. I'm not really, just me personally, whether it's a split driveway or two driveways, I know that'll probably get worked out. And this ought to blend in with the property that's around it, and I think they've been really generous with the setbacks. So to me, this is probably the easy, right thing to do.
Any other discussion?
I agree with everything he said. I appreciate the work they did with staff and the town.
Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add? And just for a reminder's sake, if you plan to vote no, I'd love to hear why. All right.
I'm going to vote in favor, but I have concerns about the curb cuts. And I don't know what more to say about it, except it seems like it would be best if they could be, there could be one curb cut serving the two properties would be a better way to do it. But I'm not going to vote against it on that.
Very well. Anyone else? Okay, then would all those in favor of finding 18 REZ 23 consistent, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. That is a unanimous passage. Our next case is 18 REZ 12, and a Redling is here. Good evening, Ms. Redling.
Good evening. This is a rezoning request to amend the existing Highcroft Village PDD and to create a new 10.2-acre Cary Point PDD at the corner of Morrisville Parkway and Highway 55 in northwestern Cary. This two-part rezoning request begins with amending Tract 5 of the Highcroft Village Planned Development District. Tract 5 is divided into north and south by Morrisville Parkway. The first rezoning action proposed by the applicant is to remove 1.168 acres from Tract 5 south. You can see that much of the property to be removed is impacted by streams and stream buffers. No other changes are proposed for Tract 5 south. The second rezoning action proposed by the applicant is to combine the property removed from Highcroft Village with two adjacent parcels to create the new PDD called Cary Point. Here's an aerial view of the proposed PDD site. There are two adjacent projects you should be aware of. Staff is currently reviewing a development plan for a preschool to be built on the adjacent property to the west, and a rezoning application is in process for this property and this property to be rezoned to general, commercial, and R8 residential. A public hearing on this application was held at the November 18th, 2018 Town Council meeting. Currently, this parcel is being used for American soil and mulch and other adjacent uses. As you can see here are these subdivisions: self-storage, Army Reserve Center, and Oaks at Highcroft North. The existing base zoning for the proposed site is Planned Development District Major and Office Research and Development. The proposed zoning is PDD Minor. The applicant has submitted this proposed master plan for the new Cary Point PDD. The PDD would have two subdistricts. R1 would be the residential subdistrict containing approximately 8.2 acres, and C1 would be the commercial subdistrict containing approximately 2 acres. The green hatched area represents the stream buffers that will be required, and they are substantial. A 100-foot stream buffer will be required along the southern perimeter of the site, and a 50-foot buffer will be required along the western perimeter of the site. The permitted uses for R1 would be a maximum of 120 age-restricted multifamily units and associated amenities and recreation. The applicant is proposing a condition that requires 30% of first-floor building area to be devoted to private recreation and amenities for the residents. The maximum building height would be 55 feet. For the C1 commercial subdistrict, the permitted uses would be those listed here, which include office, small shopping center, retail store, bank, restaurant with a drive-through, without a drive-through, and pharmacy. In the C1 subdistrict, the building floor area would be restricted to 25,000 square feet. The traffic impact analysis was conducted for a maximum of 12,500 square feet of office and 12,500 square feet of commercial. The maximum building height would be 42 feet in this subdistrict. This map shows the proposed open space and circulation plan for the PDD. Cary's land development ordinance requires that PDDs deliver high-quality designs that preserve critical environmental resources, provide above-average open space, and use creative building and circulation layout. The applicant is proposing 3,600 square feet of community gathering space, which is a 50% increase over the LDO requirement for the site, which would have been 2,400 square feet. Vehicular cross-access between the residential and commercial subdistricts, and cross-access to the adjacent site to the west. A pedestrian path between the subdistricts, an additional pedestrian circulation route depicted by the blue dashed line. This map shows proposed perimeter and streetscape buffers. The applicant is proposing a 30-foot streetscape along Morrisville Parkway adjacent to the R1 residential subdistrict, which is a reduction from the LDO streetscape standard of 50 feet for residential development adjacent to a thoroughfare. The applicant will meet the LDO's streetscape and perimeter buffer standards for the remainder of the site. The commercial C1, the LDO only requires 30 feet there because it is non-residential next to a thoroughfare. The applicant is proposing a parking rate of 1.25 spaces per dwelling unit for the R1 subdistrict and has provided a written justification attached to your staff report. The justification is based on data that indicates there is reduced parking demand associated with age-restricted units. The parking rate for the C1 subdistrict will follow LDO requirements for any use proposed. Cary's GIS maps and previous field studies indicate that stream buffers will impact this property. The PRCR Facilities Master Plan shows a street side trail is proposed along Highway 55 adjacent to the subject site, and a street side trail is also proposed for the north side of Morrisville Parkway. Go Triangle Route 311, a peak period service between Apex and the Research Triangle Park, operates along Highway 55 but doesn't stop in the vicinity of this location. Stops may be added in the future, though, based on demand. Highway 55 and Morrisville Parkway are both designated as future 4-lane median divided thoroughfares. And pulling back a little bit for a larger context, west of the site, Morrisville Parkway, the Morrisville Parkway Extension and NC 54 interchange project is under construction. The project will fill in the remaining missing segments of Morrisville Parkway, and when construction is complete, Morrisville Parkway will become a major east-west route. A traffic study was performed for this site. It studied the intersections depicted here with yellow dots. As a result of site-generated traffic, the study recommended several improvements, including improvements to the NC 55 and Morrisville Parkway intersection. Staff believes the subject rezoning, as well as the upcoming rezoning across the street on Morrisville Parkway, will have a significant impact on the intersection. As of this date, the applicant hasn't committed to making any of the recommended off-site traffic-related improvements. A neighborhood meeting was held on June 6th, and 17 citizens attended. Concerns were expressed about traffic, proposed building height and buffering, and questions were asked about the traffic analysis report. Staff was also contacted by 2 citizens who had similar concerns about use, buffers, and traffic. At the Town Council public hearing on August 23rd, no citizen spoke. Considering that the applicant is proposing a reduction in the streetscape from 50 to 30 feet along Morrisville Parkway adjacent to the apartments, one council member did ask about other streetscape widths along Morrisville Parkway. Staff did some research and found that along Morrisville Parkway, in the vicinity of the subject site, which will be, as we know, mostly residential but have some commercial and office, Friars Gate subdivision has a 30-foot streetscape. It's on both the north and south sides of Morrisville Parkway. Sedgefield subdivision has a 50-foot streetscape. Oaks at Highcroft has a 50-foot streetscape. And then the future development here and here will be determined by the use. Non-residential will require 30 and residential will have 50. Right now, just to the west, there is a site plan in-house for preschool, and that would require a 30-foot streetscape. Since the Town Council public hearing, the applicant has submitted a new rezoning condition committing to construction of a northbound right turn lane leading to a full movement entrance on Morrisville Parkway. So they've committed to constructing that turn lane on the adjacent property, and earlier we saw that they had planned to make a cross-access connection to the western property, and so that would then be a lane taking them to the full movement intersection there. They also committed to doing that lane prior to obtaining the first certificate of occupancy, and then a commitment to construct the remaining 3 side entrances, which would all be right in, right out, also tied to construction milestones. These side entrances likely will be requirements of the applicant at the time of the development plan, But by making these zoning conditions, the applicant is providing assurance that adequate access to the site will be in place prior to complete build-out of the PDD. On the future growth framework map, the subject site is largely designated for business industrial park, with a small portion on the western end designated as traditional neighborhood. The proposed project would convert 7 acres of designated business, office, and industrial acreage to residential. Staff has evaluated the applicant's proposal against the policies of the Imagine Cary plan and the future growth framework map. Regarding the relevant policies in live, shape, and shop, staff finds that the proposed project will add an additional housing option for seniors in this area of Cary. The proposed apartments aren't, though, as recommended by the Imagine Cary plan, within a designated mixed-use center where residents would be within walking distance of a range of services and shopping and optimally transit connections. In fact, the PDD will be somewhat geographically set apart because of the perimeter stream buffers on 2 sides and the major thoroughfares on the other 2 sides. That said, the applicant is committing to dedicate a minimum of 30% of the first floor interior building area to amenities and services for the residents in the R1 subdistrict. There will also be pedestrian paths to a limited number of non-residential uses in the adjacent 2-acre commercial subdistrict, and the PDD will have 3,600 square feet of community gathering space. Regarding the relevant work and move policy, staff finds that the proposed PDD will convert 7 acres of potential office acreage to a mostly residential use, with about 2 acres devoted to general commercial and office. But it should be noted that the site's narrow configuration, steep topography, and stream buffers limit its developability and thus the range of potential office uses. Staff also notes that Marsfield Parkway will become a major east-west route with the opening of the I-540 interchange, and the proposed PDD will have access to 1 full movement intersection. All the remaining entrances will have to be right-in, right-out movements. According to the traffic analysis report, the traffic generated from the proposed project will contribute to delays and a reduction in the level of service at the intersection of NC 55 and Marsfield Parkway. And these issues haven't been addressed with a rezoning condition by the applicant, and I believe they have been working with other rezoning applicants to come up with some type of solution, and they may talk to you about that tonight, but I need to remind you those are not rezoning conditions. After carefully weighing all these findings, including the conversion of office to higher density residential in conjunction with the projected traffic impacts, staff finds that the applicant's proposal is not consistent with the policies of the Imagine Cary community plan. This concludes staff's presentation, and the applicant's representative is here to present their case.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Jamie Schrader with Parker Poe at 301 Fayetteville Street. I'm standing in tonight for Glenda Topp, who's the applicant, but is on vacation out of the country. So Travis Fluitt and I are going to do our best to present the case and answer any questions that you might have. I really appreciate staff's summary. It's very thorough of where this case has been and where we believe it's going. But I'd just like to highlight some of the ways in which we do believe that the project is consistent with the Cary community plan. There was a very good explanation about what this project is about. It's a mix of taking a portion of an existing PDD to create a new PDD and providing senior housing and a commercial component at a prominent intersection that is ripe for development and has had some challenges in being developed over time. Due to the significant site constraints that Ms. Redling highlighted, including the significant buffer, which takes up almost nearly the whole southern portion of the site, combined with the topography and the existing development patterns around it, the site has been difficult to develop. But we believe that the proposal now is consistent with the future growth framework map because it's consistent with both designations, the business and industrial category, which supports housing as other uses and supports obviously the office and commercial. It's also consistent with the traditional neighborhood designation, which supports multifamily at the periphery near shopping and good access to transportation. That's exactly what we have here, where we have a high traffic corridor in NC 55. The commercial use is designated along that high traffic area, and then the multifamily use transitions between that corridor and the existing more traditional residential development to the west. This is also consistent with several of the policies that are cited in the staff report and that we pulled from the Cary Community Plan, including the LIVE chapter, which stresses the need for housing choices to suit our aging population and provide services to residents. The condition of 30% of the ground floor area of the residential use providing non-residential amenities to the occupants of the residential development speaks directly to this issue, providing housing and providing services for our seniors. The SHAPE chapter encourages infill development such as this. As I mentioned, this site is somewhat of a sliver between other sites that have developed more readily, mainly due to that existing buffer that's on the area. The SHAPE chapter encourages mixed-use development and appropriate transitions between land uses. While this is not in the designated area that the mixed-use density might otherwise have chosen, it's in an appropriate area that provides those transitions I mentioned from the Highway 55 back towards the more traditional single-family residential neighborhood. And the streetscape we provided, as well as some of the pedestrian connections within the site, the cross-access between the east and the west portions of the site, all promote that walkability and that engaging of the two different uses within the site. Finally, the Engage chapter encourages residents to have recreational options. Not only do we have the streetscape provided, but we have numerous areas of connectivity between the sites, as well as two different options for pedestrian connectivity tying into the buffers. And I'd like to just highlight some of the zoning conditions that really cement why this is consistent with the Cary Community Plan. It was mentioned the 30% of the ground floor area that's designated to amenities for the occupants. We also highlighted the 3,600 square feet of gathering space that's 50% above the minimum that's requirement. We exceed the buffer requirements all over for the site. So while the 30-foot streetscape is not consistent with the LDO requirement of 50, I believe Anna's diagram showing how many other areas have that 30-foot streetscape and how the future development of those adjacent parcels, which we know is the daycare is proposed to be non-residential, and the rezoning just north across the street is also proposed to have a non-residential component. Those are likely to be 30 feet and consistent with what you see along that corridor. I'd also like to point out that the cross-section of Morrisville Parkway is a little odd in that it does that little jog. So we're not talking about a manicured 30-foot streetscape or 50-foot like you would see in Weston, and we have this severe jag. We have something that's a little bit inconsistent today, and what we'd provide is not so inconsistent as to warrant an overall finding of inconsistency. I'd also like to point out that the severity of that buffer along the southern point of the site makes it very difficult to have a 50-foot streetscape and not totally squeeze out the use and required parking along the parcel. And then just noting some of the traffic improvements, we have committed to some of the traffic improvements recommended, but not all of them. And the majority of the reason for that is that the eastbound turn from Morrisville Parkway traveling north on NC 55 is a commitment of 3 other proposed zonings that will come before this board. We have been talking extensively with the owners of those rezonings, trying to reach a consensus as to who should be responsible for the cost of some of those improvements. And Mr. Flute will talk about the proportion of our site traffic that's generated compared to those other 3. We were before the town council in August and deliberately waited to be before you tonight until we could reach a consensus, but waited almost 6 months and weren't able to do that in advance of the hearing. However, we were able to reach a private agreement, and I have that signed copy with me tonight that I'd like to hand up. I don't expect the board to be able to read and digest all of it, and I don't expect staff to as well, but I would like to note for the record that we do have that signed agreement for all of the other rezoning cases to work together towards cost sharing of the improvement for that offsite improvement, and they have engaged Mr. Fluitt with Kimley Horn to look at the cost of that improvement and what their proportionate share would be. And so I'd submit that while that's not a zoning condition, it's a commitment by all four to investigate their individual responsibility and their traffic as it relates in proportion to this overall, and to work towards that as we go forward to site plan. And as I hand that out, I'd just like to note, but for that one zoning condition, it shouldn't be the reason that the entire case is deemed inconsistent. We've tried as best we can to offer zoning conditions to bring it into consistency with the Cary Community Plan, and we'd like you to take that into account as you listen to Mr. Fluitt discuss the traffic.
Good evening, Travis Fluitt with Kimley Horn Associates. As Ms. Schwaler noted, we are not making the commitment to construct the left turn lane for several reasons. The trip generation alone for this site is not driving the need. The main need for this turn lane is due to the extension of Morrisville Parkway and the new interchange at 540. So this site is only a portion of that. Per the TAR, this site will generate 110 new AM trips and 204 PM peak hour trips, which sounds like a lot when you consider there are 3 other developments behind us: the Sam's Express on the north side of Morrisville Parkway, the Twyla Road North and the Twyla Road South developments to the west, several of which will generate more traffic and add more traffic to this intersection than this site. And those 3 TARs also recommended this same improvement for all 3 of those developments. So the town does have comfort that this development improvement will be made by one of these developments. And as Ms. Schwaler mentioned, we have, all 4 parties have entered an agreement to share the cost of that improvement. And we, Kimley Horn, are currently working on a cost estimate for that improvement, the proportionate share between those 4 developments. But this development had to move forward while we were trying to nail down that commitment, waiting on those other parties. They lost 6 months in the process, waiting for those parties to come to the table. Excuse me. So the lack of the commitment for this improvement alone does not justify inconsistency with the Cary Community Plan, let alone justify denial, because it's one factor of many and will be performed as a shared expense by these developments. And just wanted to note that by making this a PDD, we will ensure better circulation and access by guaranteeing this site has access out to the full movement on Morrisville Parkway. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. There may be some. Let me start on the left this time. Or actually, I'll start on the right because you haven't seen the agreement yet. And do you have any questions for our applicant or for our staff?
So basically, this document that went past us a minute ago, that is an agreement that y'all are going to come together eventually and figure out who's going to pay for it.
Correct. Assuming that recommendation stays as a recommendation for all 4 zoning cases, they've committed to making the improvement on a proportionate share of the traffic they're responsible for.
Okay. I think that's my first question. I might have them, I'm formulating my others. Go ahead, Steve.
So on the buffer reduction for the residential piece, because you also asked to have the required number of parking spaces reduced just based on who will be using the apartments, which seems to make sense to me. That did not afford you the extra space you need to make that a 50-foot buffer, or is it I know that's a difficult lot. I actually do understand that, but what's driving that?
I'm trying to get back to your great slide. I got you out of the way. Sorry. Well, I think what Anna and I were trying to do is find the slide that kind of shows how much of the depth it is. I mean, it's a pretty significant portion of the site, and once you do that and then try to fit the building and how the building needs to be laid out, there wasn't enough room to do that and make the 50-foot streetscape work. Sorry.
So the parking just really didn't buy you what you were looking for, and I know you're trying to account for these streams that are in the back, so I get
right.
that.
Right, and then the parking reduction was based on that, as well as a need-based demand that we've seen, that the operator has seen based on their operation of these centers, the lesser need for that amount of parking.
I guess my other concern, and the reason I'm hung up on the buffer is because, Morrisville Parkway, and, those of us that live out there see it, it was reported in here, it is going to be a super busy thoroughfare once it connects with 540. And I'm just thinking of noise and all that for those folks in those apartments because, that buffer is not there. Maybe it won't be an issue, I'm not sure, but it seems to be, just looking at it, and I can't see the site or whatever, but I don't know how close the buildings will be to the buffer, if there'll be a parking lot there, but it just seems that based on the residential piece and how busy Morrisville Parkway is going to be, that buffer might be important.
If I might pass up, we had our engineer prepare some conceptual drawings of what that difference between a 30 and 50 might look like, and I'd like to pass those out in case that helps ease some questions. These, of course, are not full renderings, but just a kind of a diagram of how they might be different. What this shows is essentially what you would be getting with a 30 versus what you would be getting with a 50, and both in plan and I guess in from a visual sense, it's not a significant difference. And I'd like to just reiterate that both of those adjacent parcels are likely to be 30. And then we've also worked with the owners across the street to increase the buffer on the north side by private agreement. So they have an existing 50-foot, and the owner has worked with them to install landscape material just to reduce the chance that they will be impacted by the noise.
I'll say, so just make sure I don't get confused. So you're talking about across the street?
So up here, let me see if I can make, right through here.
Right through, okay.
Right, so this is where the SAM's rezoning is going to be, that if it would be non-residential, my understanding would be that would be a 30-foot streetscape. This is the existing, I think Sedgefield, and that's 50, but they've worked with these owners here to offer increased landscape plantings to make sure that they're not negatively impacted, and they've done that by private agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
No, I'm good, thanks.
I have a question actually for staff. Ms. Redding, if you could go to slide 33 for me, please. You mentioned in your presentation that there's a 100-foot stream buffer to the south and a 50-foot to the west.
Yes.
I'm just wondering what the reasoning in the ordinance is, specifically why the south is 100 feet and the west is only 50 feet.
It's been determined that the southern stream is a perennial stream,
Okay.
and those require a larger buffer.
Okay. That makes sense. That's my only question.
Okay. Oh, I'll go across first.
Well, I was going to ask about the agreement that was passed around. That's not really binding on anybody, is it? It's an agreement to talk as things develop.
It's an agreement to work together towards cost sharing. It's an agreement to move forward with Kimley Horn, and they've engaged Kimley Horn. And then the assumption at the end of this is that there will be a more robust agreement spelling out who is which costs they're responsible for and what the actual amount is.
But at this point, nobody that participated in that can enforce it against anybody else.
Well, it'd be difficult to answer that question. I mean, we realize it's not a robust agreement at this point, but it's taken us 6 months to get that signed, and the reason it wasn't submitted earlier was it was just executed today. So it's taken us a long time to get those parties to come to the table. They've been talking, but haven't shown a commitment to move forward altogether until today. And so our hope is that as we move forward through the zoning process and the site plan, it will become a fully enforceable agreement with specific amounts of what everyone is to pay.
Is that it?
Yeah.
I'm a little bit uncertain about the right-in, right-out access to this property. Can you show something that clarifies that again? I think you did show one quick slide that had some arrows on it. So how do people get there from 55?
Well, when you're driving south on 55, you can turn right into the, directly off of Highway 55. And these are all, this is a site plan issue, but earlier we've looked at this, and I think our transportation people, and they may want to address this better than I can, but it's determined you would turn right in, but you couldn't turn left out.
Right? Correct.
Yes, good evening, thank you. So I'm assuming you're speaking coming from the south on 55, how you would get into the site, and that's one of the commitments is to construct a turn lane that will be at the, which you see the full movement intersection opening that's on the west near Sedgefield. So access can be achieved to the site coming from the south on 55. They'd make the left onto Morrisville Parkway, and they would use that median opening to access the site. Or they can do a U-turn movement as well.
Let's see. Okay, that's all I have for this moment.
Can you actually just validate, is the daycare planned to be there, or that's part of this proposal?
The daycare preschool is a separate proposal, and it's already, we have a site plan in-house for that that's being reviewed. The zoning is already in place for that too.
Okay. My concern is less about the buffer and more about the rezoning from business. Because just looking in the area, if I were a resident in that area, I would appreciate some businesses coming in, something that I could walk to. So I personally would rather see more businesses there than additional residential. It looks like the majority of the space is going to be residential versus business. So that's my concern.
Anything else?
That's it.
Okay, great.
I appreciate the detail. You guys have covered mostly everything I had, except for one. And I don't know if staff is able to answer this. Regarding this agreement, my limited time on the board, this is the first time this has come across to me. Can you answer how comfortable you are with this? I mean, is this something you're confident that will get done?
Let's see, let me make sure I know what you're asking. Are we confident the PDD will be built?
Will the group work together to make the traffic?
Oh, well, that's a private matter. The way we would look at it is simply if there were a zoning condition and that we could have that tied to something that we can regulate and enforce, such as a certificate of occupancy, that would give us assurance. Otherwise, not to say that it's not a lack of trust in people, but rather we have nothing legally to enforce that with unless a zoning condition is crafted after that agreement that gives us that assurance. And I don't think they're there yet. It doesn't mean they won't get there, but.
Okay, thank you.
I'm ready to make a motion.
Add to that, if that's okay. And we certainly appreciate the staff's response and don't want to put them on the spot with that of producing the agreement tonight. I don't believe that Anna has had a time to really digest it, and so we don't pretend to try to shove that down the town's throat. We do understand the interest in having an enforceable agreement. We just, unfortunately, we waited for 6 months and just could not get the other players to the table. And would just submit that while we're interested in working out something going forward, we don't want them to wait in the wings and kind of hold us hostage when we have the least amount of traffic.
Gotcha.
To only be responsible for it. So that's why it hasn't developed to this point, I believe.
Any more follow-ups on that? Well, let me just run with it a little bit if I can. So the other parties to that agreement, I guess this would be to Ms. Wedling. There's no zoning condition in any approved zoning right now that commits to a left turn lane.
At the intersection of Morrisville Parkway. No, there's not.
And some of these parties may not even have applied yet for rezonings, but are there any rezonings in the pipeline that have a zoning condition that says they will put a left turn lane in there?
No.
None in the pipeline with that condition.
So that agreement then, I guess it would be fair to say, is if someone commits, be it one of the rezonings or two or three, if one rezoning commits and locks themselves down that they will put that left turn lane in, then that becomes a cost-sharing agreement among other folks who will kick in, even though it's not in their zoning condition, that they will explicitly do it. Is that a fair assessment of how this thing works?
I believe so. I mean, ideally, all four will be going forward in short order, and I believe we're just the first before the board. And so it would be ideal for us to be able to work out something more robust before we go to town council, but that would be the concept that everybody commits.
So it would be conceivable no one would put a zoning condition in to make that left turn lane, and this would be totally moot.
Right.
I do want to point out, I haven't seen it, Anna hasn't read it, we haven't, so you guys have read more of it than we have. And just to reiterate what Anna has said before, you really shouldn't consider it at this point because it's not a zoning condition.
Exactly.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah, it is. So I hope that maybe
That helped.
clear that up a little bit. And I know we're not supposed to consider the parcel to the left and the daycare and all, but I assume that portion of land that wants to be subsumed into this particular application is not part of the site plan. It's just dead space.
That's correct.
With a stream on it.
It wouldn't affect the site plan for the preschool.
Okay. And it's a I guess non-perennial or annual stream, so you can just bridge it. It's a smaller buffer, and you can
It's an
put a road across it.
Yeah, intermittent, but it would need a bridge.
Right. And that's, from what I understand, the intent is to marry up to the entrance across the street and get a full. So that's probably the necessity for that little parcel there. Okay. Question about the amenities. We're talking about the amenities for 50 and older, 55 and older, whatever that is on the first floor of the residential unit.
Unit or units.
Right.
Depending on, building. Or
Exercise room or whatever, and those kinds of things, amenities for the common use of everyone who lives there. The commercial property to the right is not committing to any amenities specifically targeted at a 50-year-old or older clientele. Yeah. Okay. And let's see. That's it for the questions that I have. Does anyone else have any other questions? I thought you mentioned you have a motion.
Yeah, I'll make a motion.
Go ahead.
I motion to find, that the board find case number 18 REZ 12 is not consistent with the comprehensive plan and all of our other applicable plans for the reasons set forth in the staff report, presentation, and discussion by the Planning and Zoning Board.
Motion that it is not consistent. Do I have a second for that?
A second.
Would you like to add something to that?
Sure. So just a personal observation, this is the second time in my sitting here or being part of anything with the Planning and Zoning Board that Ms. Top had suggested senior housing in an area that's not very appropriate. So, and that comes into here. Senior housing close to a major thoroughfare like this, it's not close or convenient to any amenities. It's just not very practical to me. It's close to Carpenter, so that's a historic special planning area. So the building height is a concern for me. This area being close to 540 and closer to RTP would make more sense to have apartments for just anybody, not aimed at 55 and older if you were going to have apartments here. I'm not really that comfortable with the traffic responses that we've received tonight. I've been privy to a lot of personal agreements through applicants. I've actually personally been affected by one, and I don't like them. If it's not a condition, there's no legal enforcement behind it. So I don't like them at all. We were looking at multiple parties over multiple rezoning requests to figure out who's going to be responsible financially to put that traffic improvement there, that left turn lane. That's not good enough. That's basically it. So
I agree with everything she said. Mine is strictly the move chapter, and I know the applicant. I'm not doubting your sincerity and what you're trying to get done, but we just keep kicking this can down the road. Someone's going to have to ante up and work on that. So it's the move chapter that sticks with me.
Anyone else want to comment on this, on the discussion of this motion?
I agree with Sherry's point. I think it's an inappropriate use for over 50. I'm just scratching my head about that, why they chose that particular designation or demographic for a placement like this, and particularly with this busy road. I mean, it is only going to get worse, and I think I share your concern about the
Panther Creek High School's off that area, that Morse, is that right? Or is that McCrimmon?
I think it's further north.
Across the street.
Well, yeah, but Panther Creek is off of which one? I can't remember, McCrimmon or Morrisville?
It's always way.
Hope's right here.
Green Hope's right there, okay. Because, I mean, there's two major high schools right there close by, and you see a lot of accidents in that area that have nothing to do with the high school students. But
Of course not.
So any other discussion on this particular motion?
I just have one thing to say. I have really struggled with this because that's a tough piece of property to develop, and something's going to go there. I kind of wish that this one would go on, and it's not our place to do this, but you know, this is one of those that kind of begs to go back and do some looking. You know, I don't want to say go on hold or go on pause, but just to work this out so we could all get a little bit more comfortable. But I do have a lot of empathy with this piece of property. This is very difficult with the streams to develop, but the usage, I'm hung up on the buffer and I'm hung up on the left turn lane. So it's hard for me to get past that. But I do have a lot of empathy, and I think these folks are trying hard to develop something there, and maybe after tonight they can get these parties together, but I do have a lot of empathy for them.
I thought, being our resident parking space guy,
I know.
you were going to point that out, because I think that's what people are saying. I'm scratching my head. I don't know why 55 or 50 or age restricted. We can use smaller ratio of parking lots because we're age restricted. If it was just a regular apartment, we'd have to have much more parking places, and the lot is probably not conducive for that. That's my guess. Anything on this end?
Well, you're talking about age restricted, but from what I understand, this age restriction only requires one person of 55 to live in one of these things. And so, you know, from personal experience, I don't see that as like senior living. And I think that that's not necessarily a total justification for reduction of parking spaces. I'd like to know what some of the other thought was from staff about why that was an acceptable, or whether that was an acceptable reduction.
Any other comments on this? Other than I'm really pleased to hear the board talking about things about if it's not a zoning condition, it really doesn't apply to what we're talking about, which I applaud you for. I heard that on both sides of the room, so I'm really glad to hear that. Yeah, if it's not conditioned, it pretty much doesn't exist, at least for the terms of what we're doing. And if there's no other discussion, the motion is to find this inconsistent. So if you vote yes, you're finding it inconsistent, just so we're all clear on that. So all those in favor of the finding of inconsistency on 18 REZ 12, please raise your hand and say aye if you don't mind.
Aye.
Is anyone opposed to that? Okay, it is unanimous to concur with staff in finding it inconsistent, so that motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank
you. The cases are finished, and we are on to new/old business. Nobody has anything that I was made aware of, so we're off to adjournment.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are now adjourned. Thank you very much.
This has been a production of Cary TV. Visit the Town of Cary's website at townofcary.org.